You're listening to Forge Theater Labs,
a podcast devoted to exploring theater history. Where does that idea come from?
concepts in storytelling.
Is anything that original?
Isn't that just an assumption?
And the creation of theater from behind the scenes.
How do they even do that?
This is Forge Theater Labs.
History, innovation, perspective.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Forge Theater Labs. I'm Josh N Hsu, your host, and today I'm thrilled to invite Jen Shepard to the conversation. Jen Shepard is an artistic director of Penobscot Theater Company, one of Northeast's oldest and continuously operating professional theater companies. Jen brings a unique path to leadership. She's the co-owner of Improv Arcadia, where she has been performing and producing since 2004 and trained with institutions like IO Theater, the Annoyance Theater, and the Second City. A longtime presence on the Penobscot stage, she was most recently in Becoming Dr. Ruth, Matt and Ben, and A Christmas Carol. She now steps into artistic leadership, bringing a philosophy rooted in improv, specifically yes and. Welcome, Jen.
Hi, Josh. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so thrilled to have you. And I'm really excited to talk about this idea of transition and adaptability and what it means to move from executive director to artistic director, right? But yeah. I thought I might kick it off with a fun little icebreaker. If your leadership style were an improv game, what would it be?
It'd probably be, do you know the game, Hey, Fred Schneider, what are you doing? It's based on the famous B-52 singer, and you chant, hey, Fred Schneider, what are you doing? And then everybody has a chance to say what Fred Schneider's doing, and usually it's incredibly varied. So I would say that no 2 days for me are ever the same, and so I am, hey, Fred Schneider, what are you doing?
I think that really speaks to sort of your adaptability inside the space, to be able to move from that executive director to artistic director role. What prompted that shift? You know, obviously there was the opening, but what prompted that shift for yourself, and how has it felt now that you're in it?
Yeah, part of what prompted the shift is, I joined the administration in 2021, and at that time, the artistic director was Barry Newport. Then we had an acting artistic director, Trisha Hobbs, and then we hired Jonathan Barry. So I went through 3 artistic directors. And I guess, to be honest, I just felt like I think I could do the job. And also, the theater, since coming out of the pandemic, as with most regional theaters, has been in serious financial trouble. And structurally, I am not sure that the organization at this time can support 2 top earners, which is what you have when you have 2 co-leaders, of course. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, if I could combine the jobs, and I'm also we were lucky enough to hire a full-time director of development, so that sort of freed up about 60% of my time as the executive director, because I was doing that. So that was sort of the genesis. Is I really think the organization needs a moment to determine the best leadership structure. So I do believe there will be some sort of secondary, either a co-leader or another person sort of close to the artistic director seat, which is currently at the top. Or perhaps we end up like there's a theater, Stonington, and the executive director actually sits in the top spot, which could be the case as well. I don't know. So we're doing strategic planning right now, and I wanted to give the organization the time to figure it out. Just because we've always had a dual leadership model doesn't mean that we should continue, right? There's lots of things we've all done. That doesn't mean we should continue doing them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate that idea of giving yourself space and time to sort of reorganize and structure leadership. Now that you're doing both roles, what has changed most in how you think, whether it be artistically, strategically, emotionally, because of the burden that comes with both roles?
That's a really good question. I guess probably what's changed is that I feel that artistically, the theater, we've been in the past, depending on who's doing the artistic programming, sometimes we've reflected almost like a Broadway sensibility, trying to do the biggest shows all the time. Then, Jonathan was kind of the opposite. He wanted to do really new playwrights, smaller plays. And I feel like our identity right now is somewhere in the middle. I feel to survive, we need to move more towards the model of, and I'm more interested in new works and that kind of thing. But I think you have to take steps to get there. Financially, it doesn't, sometimes people won't take a chance on a new play, which is a bummer to me. So my question is, how do I move the audience? How do I sort of bring them along so that they think that they get excited when we program a new play? They get excited when there's a title that they are like, I don't know what that is, but it sounds interesting. And that's kind of started to happen with the Garbologist, which is our current show. So I think that's what's changed, is that I sort of temper the artistic vision with the financial. And it's interesting to me. I guess it comes from my improv background. To me, I see it like a set of monkey bars that's what I have to play on right now. Mm-hmm. And I hope to expand those monkey bars and to the point where I'm not worrying as much about financial constraints. But the reality in America is that you have to worry about the finances.
Of course. And I think there is value in those classics that we bring to the stage that audiences enjoy. There is fresh perspective and even room for that, even as you're bringing new plays to the forefront. And I absolutely agree. You have to let them bite onto something before they go for the innovative dish, so to speak. Was there a moment where you felt like there was you mentioned the Garbologist this season, where you felt that click for the new plays, where audiences were really on board. On the flip side, was there a play this season that was financially rewarding for you, that was both artistically and financially rewarding, where that shift sort of met in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it was Turn of the Screw, I think, this is the Jeffrey Hatcher version. It's fairly well known to theater people, but I feel like your average audience bear may not know. And it's a very pared back version of it. There's no sound effects. There's no props. There's only 2 actors. One of them plays all the other characters. And we did a very spare set, which is kind of what you're supposed to do. And we really pulled it back even further, making it sort of a different experience for our audience, I think. We're known for like our sets, like our sort of like fully realized sets. And I'm interested in moving us towards, yes, we can do that, but we also can do a gestural set, an emotional construct on stage, that is more representative of an idea. And so that play was a pretty high concept, and our audiences loved it. No music in the entire play. And I loved being in the audience because it was just silent. People were so tense. And so I really liked that. And I thought that was a play that also way overperformed, where we had set the budget goal. So it's not a new work, but it was, I think, for our audience, it's challenging, I think, in a good way,
Yeah, and, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's not a typical thing where I think like an audience pleaser, Turn of the Screw. Yeah. That would not be sort of in my mind. Provocative, sure.
Yeah.
Were there any other surprises along the way? Because that is obviously very surprising. Any sort of like keen surprises sort of looking at this season?
I mean, let me think. I mean, the Garbologist for me is a surprise. I don't know if you know the script, Josh, but it's a 2-hander. It's kind of like what I would call like a odd couple or buddy comedy. Like if you're being really reductive, if you're just like, give me the elevator pitch, like that's it. And it has a lot of swearing, which sometimes our audiences can be really sensitive to, even though, the majority of people swear. And it's the audience is not just like it, but I've been like stopped on the street at other functions and people telling me like, I just loved it so much. And my favorite compliment was from an older woman, probably 81 or something like that. And she said, not only was it beautiful to look at, but it was such a good script, such a good story. And I just, I think that's something here that I see a lot. I see ageist attitudes towards audience members. Oh, well, they're old. Of course, they don't get it. They're not hip enough. And I don't think that's true at all. I find our audiences to be pretty savvy, actually. Even if they like a more traditional theater experience, that doesn't mean they don't know a good script when they hear it. So I loved that comment, and it was so I'm just so pleased that audiences don't just like it, but they love it, and the word of mouth has been hot.
Absolutely. And I believe that's directed by John Shurtek. Yes?
Yes, from the Countercurrent Collective in Belfast. Yes.
For our listeners who don't know, you can check out more about them on our podcast from season 0. They joined us for our first season and our inaugural season. And so it was lovely talking to John and Courtney. And I'm so glad that John's working with you. You yourself, like, Countercurrent Collective, you yourself actually started in performance. You were recently on stage in Matt and Ben, which is a hilarious comedy characterized by witty dialogue, physical humor, and satire about the development of Good Will Hunting. Matt and Ben first premiered at the New York Fringe Festival. Did, performing in that kind of a fringy element inform how you think about programming such as Garbologist now, or even with directing now?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a degree in theater from the University of Iowa, and then I moved to Chicago where I fell into improv and sketch. So yeah, when I read the script for Matt and Ben, I was like, oh, this had to have been a sketch. And then when I realized it was Brenda Withers and Mindy Kaling, I was like, oh, for sure, a sketch. And that got developed into a whole play. And it's funny, this scene reminded me of or this play reminded me of, there's a scene in Second City. It's called Managers, and it's written by a woman named Sue Gillian, I think is her last name. And she wrote it so she could play a man and wear a fake mustache and shake her butt at the audience. And I thought, when I read Matt and Ben, I was like, this was Mindy Kaling's and Brenda Withers. They're like, we want to be Matt and Ben, and we want to say bro things and sort of also send up that culture. So yes, it does. When I read a script, I am always thinking about like rhythms, and I think about like textures in the season. And I try to think, that's how you think of a sketch show, and you think of how you build it. So like, you don't follow same with same, and you try to give the audience different energies, and you try to give the audience different, I don't know, like almost like not pressure points, but just like different things that might get activated inside of them. So I do think about that. And I think about also like the experience even of like, I don't know, like heavy versus light, funny versus serious. And I try to make those textures sort of pop. It was the same thing when I directed Almost Maine. I thought a lot about rhythm and silence, and because I think there's a lot of rhythm in that show that maybe might get missed. And when John Cariani saw it, he said he was glad to see it directed as a comedy. And I'm like, well, it is ultimately a comedy, but it has so much heart in it. But that's my favorite kind of comedy, to find the pathos to deliver the cathartic laugh.
Absolutely. I think, what I enjoy about Matt and Ben is that, there are some punch down moments, but for the most part, the humor in that play is like a sort of punching up. It's both, a satire, but also praise for Matt and Ben at the same time. That obsession with it, that sort of like lift that comes with that play, I think is a sort of unique balance that I think oftentimes we're missing that joy in theater, right? We miss that sort of joy with our modern humor that tends to punch down. Like, I feel like that's a welcome relief in seasons like this. And when I think of Almost Maine, I think of your season. That's what I think is like how much it lifts, not just punches down, right? With its humor.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I'm glad to hear you say that. And I think that's something I did like about Matt and Ben, is that if we were punching anyone, it was the white American male, and they can certainly take it on the chin. They might need it. So I was really thought that was awesome. And getting to play Salinger. So I did the Matt Damon track. And I think that Brenda Withers originated that role. And it was great to play Salinger, who, ate pudding and was, very sort of, I guess it was uplifting ultimately because it's about friendship, but it also was about like, you can have brilliant writers like Brenda Withers and Mindy Kaling, and they don't get this kind of break. You don't get this kind of like golden boy story. And so I loved that, but I agree with you that ultimately they did celebrate their bromance.
I think this is a great time to take a break. We'll be right back. We're talking to Jen Shepard from Penobscot Theater Company. We'll be right back. This is Forge Theater Labs.
At Forge Theater Labs, we're building bold, imaginative theater, supporting new artists, new stories, and new ways of experiencing performance. We're proud to share that Forge Theater Labs is now a sponsored project of Fractured Atlas, which means your donations are tax deductible and directly support the creation of this podcast, live tapings, and artist-driven projects. If our work has inspired you, made you think, or brought you closer to the theater community, we invite you to help keep it going. You can make a donation by visiting forgetheaterlabs.com for our link to our Fractured Atlas page. Every contribution, big or small, helps us forge new pathways for artists and audiences alike. Thank you for being part of our community.
Welcome back. I'm Josh Hsu, and we're talking to Jen Shepard from Penobscot Theater Company. Jen, we were just talking about sort of some of the shows that you've had in your season, and I wanted to turn a little bit more to the rest of the season, because this season has included Steel Magnolias, as well as Turn of the Screw, Cinderella, Almost Maine, Darker the Night, The Brighter the Stars, which is the sequel to Almost Maine, and then Garbologists, and then with Fantastics coming up, still unfolding. And so when you look at the season as a whole, what thread do you see for your season?
That's a good question. It's funny. I have one in mind. And this one, I guess for this one, it was really a season of, I thought of this as a season of like the heart, I guess. And it's so much about, I don't know, those two-person relationships. That's what I really liked about Almost Maine and Darker the Night, is all those two-person scenes. You just don't get a lot of that. And that's the bread and butter of improv. I mean, it's when you master the two-person scene, you can really do anything pretty much. And it takes patience and it takes grace to do that, because you have to just trust the other person and yourself. And so I think that was, Steel Magnolias, while there's group scenes, there's all these really lovely two-person moments, and then Turn of the Screw is all two-person moments. That's all that it is, and because it's only two actors. And Cinderella's not that, but Cinderella was at a time when the world is like, I don't know, like saying it's dark seems honestly not hyperbolic enough. Something just so beautiful and shimmering and kind of a dream of what life could be, feels like a nice thing to give to people, especially at the holidays.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Let's go back to Steel Magnolias, right?
Sure.
Obviously that this is a storied play. It's been done quite a bit, and so looking at it now, what did you learn from your audiences on how audiences responded to that production? Like where does it sit in our consciousness now? Just because it has gone through so many different versions, from movies to plays, like we've seen it. And so what is it bringing to the table for you in this moment?
Mm-hmm. I'll be like, when we said we were going to read Steel Magnolias, I was like, oh, really? Oh, and then I read it and it just hits you differently later in your life. It just does. And it is really about those relationships that sustain you in the worst moments of your life. And the best, I suppose, even if it's like a Ouisa, Clary, where they're constantly just giving each other such a hard time. But that's what really came out for me, was the female relationships, female identifying relationships. And I guess the power of that and sort of the simplicity of the play. It is a like Old Ironsides, it just doesn't, it was, our audiences loved it, all ages, mothers and daughters, best friends, sisters. That's what we were seeing. Date nights. And it was romantic, even there's not a man to be seen in the play, but they talk about the men in their lives, of course. And so it was really, that's what it was for me, was the enduring relationships. And some of the talk about religion was interesting to me because, of course, Annelle becomes very religious, and the rest of the salon doesn't know what to think about that. And I myself am not a very religious person, but I found it to be a discussion that I have had with friends, and so I thought it was well represented, like those little moments. So I guess that's what I really came away with was that like there were some differences, but they were true to one another.
I really love that. And I want to sort of pick on one thing that you mentioned, which was revisiting a play as you get older, right?
Yeah.
Like I would say, when I was younger and I read The Seagull, I was like, I don't get this. I don't understand this. Right. Like, I don't know why people are here for this. Like, sure. Great. What is going on with Chekhov? And then I read it, 3 more times in my life as I got older. And I was like, oh, I identify with this character. I identify with that character. And now I'm like, oh no, I've transitioned to the older characters. Was there something like this in your play where like the first time you read, you probably identified with X character. And then
Yeah.
as you get older, you're like, oh, I actually have stopped identifying with this character. And now I see through the lens of this character, which may inform how you direct.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think clearly the first time I read it, it was probably Shelby, who I just felt like she couldn't be far enough away from me. And now, not so much Shelby, but more Truby, who ends up sort of, I don't have children, but I have ended up mentoring many young people in my life or having, a mentor relationship. And so I felt I really loved that relationship between her and Annelle because Annelle needs so much help and Truby really helps her. And through the course of the play, Annelle gets better. And I wasn't with Weezer and Clary yet, but it's not far, Josh.
I'm going to pretend like it's further than I'd like to sort of say.
Sure.
Shifting gears to sort of a more family driven, play like Cinderella.
Yeah.
Like it always sort of is important to me that, when you're building a season to think about sort of ways to invite new people into an audience. And I think these family oriented plays are the ways to do that. Is that part of your thinking in terms of accessibility, entry points to theater?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're exactly right. So we also have an educational program that's 35 years old, and those young students and their families become, our patrons, our board members. And it's the same thing with Cinderella. These young people who are coming to the theater and having an experience. The same thing happened with Mary Poppins. You pick up, maybe they only come to the holiday show. Maybe they come to one other thing. So it's extremely important for a theater. And I understand that probably the majority of your base is maybe older. But yeah, if you're not making room for, frankly, thinking about that in a multifaceted way, like who do we see on stage is who's going to will inform in part who is in our audience and who feels welcome in the space. So for sure, Cinderella was that. And it was the slightly updated version. My favorite line in this version is when she says, it's when the prince comes with the shoe and Cinderella's sent to the kitchen and then she comes back and they added the line, but it's a great line. I am here, stepmother. I'm sorry, but I am here. And I loved that line because the actress really punched it out because it was it's the only way to make this a somewhat feminist story. So it was, and we paired that with a tea party experience that people could add. And that was magical. So it's just all these little girls and little boys or, children really is what I should say, children in living their fantasy. It was just great. So whatever that meant for them. And that was lovely. And we did pair it with a second show. We had a second show called Another Kick in Your Dickens, which is an improvised, thank you, is an improvised version of A Christmas Carol with myself and one other actor and a music director. And we take suggestions and we would tell an extremely bawdy version of A Christmas Carol. And that was for adults only. And that went very well. That was in our smaller space, which we no longer have, but we did through December have a much secondary small space.
Incredible. I'm also really excited that you brought Almost Maine by John Cariani, and you surprisingly paired it with Darker the Night, the Brighter the Stars, like back to back. What was that conversation like to sort of bring that together?
Mm-hmm. I mean, we read them, and we read them together. And while John, they're I'd say they're companions as opposed to like sequel prequel, but they are in communication. And actually, John started the Dark of the Night script first, and he considered it a more real. There's no magic realism in Dark of the Night the way there is in Almost Maine. Like there's all kinds of like shoes dropping from the sky. I mean, I love it. I eat that stuff up. But Dark of the Night is more gritty. It talks about things that are happening right now in this state. It talks about what it's like to be young and part of the LGBTQ community in this state. And John only, I think it's fair to say, he wasn't sure he could publish this play previously, but Maine seems to be ready to have the conversation. I think has been having that conversation about like who everyone's here. It's not just one group, and or one way of identifying in this state. There's lots of people here that identify in all kinds of ways. So I really love that those two plays talk to each other in that way. And when I decided to direct Almost Maine, and what I did want to drive the comedy, but I really wanted to earn the comedy by making sure that we invested in the reality. So there's another improv game called In a World, and you live in a world where X is a reality and nobody questions it. And so that was my thesis to the cast: is we live in a world where people can put love in bags, where a heart can turn to stone and be carried around, and it is not, these people aren't crazy. This is this world. And that grounds it, I think a little bit more. And to put it next to Dark of the Night, it felt really necessary because Dark of the Night is very grounded in reality. And we were lucky enough to partner with UMaine on Dark of the Night to give younger performers an opportunity and to sort of begin developing that next generation of younger actors. So it was great. And John came, and he, how many versions of Dark of the Night did I get before we opened? Like 6. I've never met somebody who edits so fast. So he was in response, and then the final edits will be based off what he saw at Penobscot Theater Company, which feels really good.
That's really exciting. Obviously I'd love to talk a little bit more because we love talking about playwriting, sort of having that sort of playwright in the room.
Yeah.
How did that inform the experience? Obviously this had seen other versions. It got a new name in the process. What was that process like? Like what led John, and I perhaps maybe should have him on the podcast next, to sort of shift that title, to sort of switch it to Darker the Night, the Brighter the Stars? And because I had seen the previous version of it.
Yes.
And so what were those changes like? Like how did that come about? Was it the conversation with the younger people? Like, where did that process go?
So I'll share one thing that John, and you should have John on. He's fantastic, and he like knows everybody in Maine, it feels like. So he did a workshop in Presque Isle with a bunch of younger performers, and he had them tell him, no, that's bullshit. No kid would ever talk like that, And so I love that John did that, and I love that John is very open to criticism, although he's very honest about it. He said one of my favorite things, that when someone criticizes him, his first reaction is, yeah, you're wrong. And then 2 seconds later, he's like, that's a good point. And I think that's pretty healthy. I think that's how I am too. Like, what are you talking about? And then I'm like, that's a good point. So the director I hired to direct Dark of the Night, her name is Cheryl Snodgrass. She's out of Chicago. She works with Hell in a Handbag, which is a queer identifying, high camp, high drag theater that does things like John Carpenter's Halloween. So they drag everything, right? So Cheryl had sort of set at the nexus of new work, LGBTQ, and also just Cheryl's like very direct, and she's vicious with her editing, which is what you need when you have a new play. Honestly, sometimes you have to kill your darlings, right? So she and John really clicked, which is what I had hoped would happen. And they ended up working on the script before he got here, and sort of like he allowed her to like excise a little bit. He told her, he's like, I want 7 minutes out of the play and I can't do it. So I want you to do it. So that was really interesting. And then for him, we were the first production that he actually sort of purposely did not get involved, because on a day-to-day basis, because he, as he said, he needed to know if the kid could stand on its own. And it did. So that was really interesting, because we found out later that he like wanted to call us every day, check in and all this other stuff, but he like stopped himself from doing it. And we wanted to call him every day, but we were like, well, we shouldn't. He's busy, because he was doing a show called Fuzzy, which is a show that discusses very serious issues with puppets. And so that's how that out. And also we used the same set and the same design team. So, and I also brought Cheryl in much earlier than we would bring a director in, because as I was making decisions in tech, I was making them for her too. So if I would set a projection parameter, or lights, or an exit entrance spot, I was, sort of determining what she had access to. So I wanted to make sure that I had her on the same page with me. And so there would be no tension or surprises when she got into her tech process.
That's so inviting, and that's so exciting. And I love the idea, as a budget saving maneuver, of using the same set, right? I think it's clever, and it's also a wonderful way to tie those pieces together. In terms of audience continuity, did your audience attend both productions? Like, what was that reaction like, getting to see those two different worlds that are adjacent to each other, that are related? Like, were they surprised at sort of how grounded the second was, or jarred by the differences? And, like, what is that experience like? Because, my expectation of Almost Maine might shift going into Darker Than Night, even though it's in the title.
Yeah. So we ran the two shows in rep for 1 week. And so some people did take advantage. I love that experience. I remember I saw all of Richard Schenken's The Kentucky Cycle, which like a lot of people were doing in like 1993 or whatever. I sat through all 9 hours in one day. I thought it was like a dream. I did the same thing in Greece with the Oresteia. I sat through all of it in one day. I'm that person. And as many theater people are, I think. So people did take advantage of it, and then some people saw, Almost Maine in early February and Darker Than Night in early March. And so a month apart. And we dressed the set differently. So obviously Almost Maine wintry and Darker Than Night summery. And we redid things like the projections and stuff like that. But I think people were very surprised at the solemnity of Darker Than Night. It's a very serious play. I mean, there's a character you never see, but almost everybody talks about her. And it is, her name is escaping me at the moment, but it's a young woman who OD'd the summer before. And I was talking with John about how like she's the fifth actor that we just don't ever see her, but everyone talks about her. And in one way or another, she touches each scene, her death or her existence before dying. And so that surprised people, and some people loved it, and other people were kind of surprised that the playwright of Almost Maine had written this very serious play. And so you know how that is. You have to. It's an interesting point for conversation, because to say to people like, well, why do you think he wrote this more serious version? Why do you think he added, a huge amount of LGBTQ representation? And there's a beautiful scene called Firecrackers or Fire. I'm not good with those kind of things, but it's about two people, and one of them is non-binary, and they just talk about their relationship, and they talk about sort of defining it and not defining it. And I think that really, for me, it was it's at the end of Act 1 in that show. And yeah, I mean, I got my favorite comment, which was from a person who also identifies as non-binary, who told me that is exactly the conversation that they had with their partner. And I told John that, I said, good job. And I think people need to see that we're all navigating the same things, really. Doesn't matter, that you still wonder, am I loved? Do I love? You know, it, it's just those are the things that most people are concerned with beyond things, like money and stuff like that, which is also discussed in the play.
Absolutely. And I think, that conversation about, sort of coming out as non-binary and what that process is like, I think is sort of the essence of an artist, right? Too often as artists, we are expected to live in a certain space. Like this is our
True.
style, this is what we do. And I think, what John proves is that there is complexity. We are people like anybody else, and our art can be complex. It can have multiple layers. It can have different perspectives, and we don't need to repeat that same formula, hopefully over and over again, like we're producing a TikTok clip or we're influencers for whatever reason.
Yeah.
All of this that you've mentioned, there is this running theme of intimacy. And I think this is especially true as we talk about that sort of final production. We talked about Garbologist before with that sort of intimacy. I would say The Fantastics really excites me. It's a show that carries a long legacy. It's sort of that sort of bridge between a fringy element show, but also a Broadway show. And so my question for you is, how are you thinking about approaching it? How is the director thinking about approaching it for today's audience?
hmm Wow. Well, that's a good question. When I got the packet of the scripts and, the libretto, I was pleased to see there's an entire folder of suggested script changes because it needs it, frankly. It's an old show. There are some ideas in it that you're like, I don't know about that. So that was a relief, I think, and I knew that was coming. But I think we are redoing the orchestration, so it won't be piano and harp. It's going to be piano, violin, and cello. For our space, we need a richer sound and a more full sound. I mean, we only seat 334 fixed seats, 356 total, but we used to seat 1,700. That was what that space would seat. So it's 4 stories. It's a big space, and so you have to fill it. So that's one of the things that we're going to do that's a little bit different. And obviously we're modernizing the costumes and the takes on Henry and Mortimer. And the director herself, she actually comes from a dance background, as well as she's done a lot of theater for young audiences. And the first thing she directed for us was with our educational program. She did The Little Prince, and it was beautiful. It's another story that I love. I bet you do too. And I just remember watching it and being blown away by what she had got these kids to. It's such a serious story. It's so sad, and uplifting as well. So I just thought she'd be the perfect director because I knew she would approach it again with that sort of everybody is taken, even Louisa and Matt, when they're at their youngest and they're perhaps most idealistic, we need to take them so seriously. We cannot dismiss them, their hopes and their dreams. And so, everybody grows up in that play, right? The second act is the world comes calling, and you realize that what's most important are the people who are in your lives. And so I knew Rachel would bring that heart to it. And the set design is by Gwen Higgins, who is she came to us as a scenic charge, so she paints all of our sets. Then she did puppets for us for My Story is Guscabe, and it was her first time doing puppets, and they were amazing. So her set is incredibly lush, and some of that meta quality of the ladders and that kind of thing, but we're surrounding it with a theatricality. It will be a very theatrical production, which I think that play calls for.
Absolutely. I think, there's
Musical.
a whole performance of,
Yeah.
right, the kidnapping, not to give anything away if you don't know anything about the show. I think it speaks to me on so many levels as we talked a little bit about sort of looking back on plays now that I'm older as a parent and
Yeah.
listening to those parents and going, oh no, those words are coming out of my mouth. I got to backtrack and take a moment and remind myself of Louise and Matt when I was younger. And, Fantastics was the first musical I ever directed. It was the first musical I ever directed. And so I was squarely on Louisa and Matt's side as I was reading this. I was like, I don't understand this, but I'm going to go with it. We're going to play into the humor. And I've learned so much since then, and it's fascinating how my perception of that show has changed, and sort of all those wonderful meta theatrical, improvisational moments within that show ring differently now as I look at it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's when I read it. I actually had never read it. And weirdly, in one day, a 32-year-old and an 80-year-old suggested to me that I look at it, which I was like, on the same day, two very different people. Okay, I gotta go read this thing. So, and my dad has it's like my dad's favorite musical, and so when I read it, I just thought, well, I ended up crying at my desk because I was like, this is so beautiful. And I just think for right now too, the world is hard and the world is rough, and parents are worried for their children. And I think that, but yet you have to send your kid out eventually one day, right? And they have to experience life. And you just hope that they create, like Matt and Louisa do eventually, no spoilers, but um a bond that is a balm in this world for you, you know?
Thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll sort of pivot back to our conversations about leadership and sort of what the next pathway is for Penobscot in your mind. We'll be right back. You're listening to Forge Theater Labs. Want to get your brand in front of a passionate, creative, and engaged audience? Forge Theater Labs is looking for partners to sponsor this podcast and join us in bringing bold, innovative theater to life. If you'd like to place an ad right here, reach out to us at marketing@forgetheaterlabs.com. It's a simple, powerful way to support the arts while sharing your message with listeners who care about creativity and community. Again, that's marketing@forgetheaterlabs.com. Let's build something extraordinary together. Welcome back, everyone. This is Forge Theater Labs, and we're talking to Jen Shepard about Penobscot Theater Company. And I thought we might pivot it back to sort of our discussion of leadership and collaboration. And specifically in your bio, you mentioned this idea of like using improvisation as a framework for leadership, collaboration. You spent years building Improvicadia. How has that background shaped the way you've navigated this season or future seasons specifically?
hmm Um, yeah, we opened Improvicadia in 2004 in Bar Harbor, my husband and I, Lawrence. And uh, that's when I learned I'm an entrepreneur. So I bring that entrepreneurial spirit to the theater, which I'm not sure that people always have in leadership positions. In the middle of the financial crisis, a space next door to us opened up, and I said, we can't produce more plays, we can't put on more classes, and we need more revenue. So we have to diversify. So we opened up a bar and cafe, and it's paying off now, of course, but it was a risk. But I knew from my experience in Bar Harbor that it would make a full evening experience, which is, of course, something that people are also looking for after the pandemic, after being, we were locked in our homes for quite some time. Well, not locked, I'm being dramatic, but it was smart to stay there. And I think the other part is on stage, when you're doing improvisation, you cannot be the sole generator of every single idea, of every single moment. In fact, that down that path lies a kind of death, a creative kind of death. And I think that's true in a leadership position, is that the temptation of a position like this is I'll do everything. I will, not that I'm not trying to do that still, but I'm resisting the urge. So you must trust your staff, and you must give away parts almost, and say, yes, you will be my collaborator on this, and we will be equal collaborators. And I think most people, when invited into a process, will meet you in the same spirit that it is offered, and it leads to better ideas. It leads to everyone feeling like they are invested, I think, which in a theater company of our size is incredibly important for them as well. Because if we don't we don't pay top dollar. We're a theater, so we have to feed them in other ways, and that means um, their minds and their souls and challenging them. I think so. I think that's where that yes and really leads me is to open it up. I guess you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that idea of like, rethinking theater in an entrepreneurial way, just because, there is something to be learned. I always sort of emphasize that theater is an interdisciplinary form, and there's too often we forget that we are interdisciplinary, and we have to remind ourselves to like seek out these other disciplines, even from the sort of business side of things, to be able to sustain ourselves. Um, you know, in terms of sort of building that cafe, in sort of diversifying your portfolio there, do you have any ideas for the future about what that might look like? As we're all sort of seeking different ways to sort of diversify our experiences. I highlight that you had this sort of like a picture tea that's a lovely idea. Is that sort of something that you have to charge your audiences for? Or do they pay for that experience as well?
Yeah, they do. I mean, the tea was the Cinderella tea party in which Cinderella appeared. There were wands and crowns, and glitter, of course. That was $30, I think, per person. But it was a ton of work, even more than we thought. That happens to us a lot. We're like, oh, this is a lot of work. But each time we learn and we get better. I think the entrepreneurial experience is it's what we said earlier, just because you've done something a certain way doesn't mean that's how you continue to do it. And that includes things like your ticket pricing, your subscriptions, your what you're offering people as people don't want a coffee mug, I don't think. I think people for a donation or to become a subscriber. I think they want to know that they are contributing to something that is interested in them. And I mean that in the most altruistic way I can, that truly there's like a relationship, I guess. And
Mhm.
that yes, you're going to challenge them, but you're also going to give them something they really like. And I think, for theater and the opportunity that the pandemic offered us was a second to stop and say, well, why did we do it like that? And why are we continuing? It's the same thing with the leadership thing. I guess that's kind of like, I don't know, I'm in the process of like pulling everything apart right now, including how we're doing our accounting, because I just feel that it is worth interrogating. So, um, for the patrons, I think that experiences are more valuable than things, right? And we say that all the time. But when you give somebody a memory with their child or their sister, because we had like tables of adult women going to the tea party, I loved it. Um, when you give them something like that, it is not just like, oh, that was a fun day. It's something that like a year from now, they're going to be like, do you remember when we were at that? Oh, that was so much fun, And I guess it's like almost every time I looked at the tea party, I started crying. I might cry a lot, Josh. So, but I'm a softie. I'm a softie. So I think I guess that's, I feel like I roundabout answered your question, but I think that is it. Of course, we have to charge for it because it's something that has effort. It takes person power.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I firmly believe that what we are offering exceeds the dollar value. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think of all those places. I just came back from vacation. And so, I was in Chicago, and every single place, my daughter was like, and my son, they were both like, yes, I will purchase that picture package. And I was like, I guess so. You've already promised them. Yeah, because they would answer for me, and they're 8 and 3. I will mind you. So they were answering for me, and I before I even got out the word, I was like, "Yes, we will purchase this next purchase package." And so we ended up purchasing picture packages at every single museum and every single experience, and they're obsessed with those pictures. They're obsessed with those photo booth pictures, and
Mm,
having that sort of memory lock in is such a fascinating way to sort of make sure that they continue to remember the theater that they've gone to. Um, with that in mind, how do you balance openness with the need to like make clear decisions? To obviously, you know, we always want to build upon something, but also sometimes our roles are to shut things down, to say no.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, well, there's no escaping that it comes down to the final decision comes down to me. So no matter what input I have, ultimately I'm the one who has to decide. And I see this job as being a synthesizer, not in the Jan Zimmer way, Josh, of playing a synthesizer, ha ha ha, but more of like of listening to everybody and arriving at the answer that I guess that, for lack of a better way to put it, that it feels right and it thinks right. It seems the smartest answer. And sometimes, a lot of times, there's somebody that's like, "Well, I wish that is not the decision that you made, but I understand." Especially if people feel heard. So I think that's been the hardest part for me, and I think it's hardest part for anybody, is that you have to say no to people sometimes, and sometimes you start with yes, but you end it no, in improv as well. So, and I, so that's how I balance it, and I really try to, if I'm making a decision that I know will be, I suppose not what somebody wants in the staff, I try to explain to them why I arrived at the decision that I arrived, and I provide transparency around that decision.
I,
And yeah,
I think that's the biggest thing about saying no is transparency is
yeah,
so key in the work, and making sure that we're not just doing it out of preference, but out of a well-reasoned decision. You mentioned a bunch of things that you're thinking about differently for next year. Is there a central thing that you're perhaps, envisioning for the upcoming year as you're pulling apart things, putting them back together,
yeah.
restructuring things?
I mean, we're going to move to a cash budget as opposed to accrual, so that's exciting. Make sure you include that.
Hmm.
But it is an interesting way for an organization that's done it differently. I think the thing that is the most that I'm really working on right now is I feel that, having observed of this theater for a long time now, that the desire or the ease of siloing, it seems easy to silo, to think, well, that's production and I'm over here doing development and I don't have to worry about what the production team's doing. That's not true. They're intimately linked. Our education program is, well, sometimes people have said, well, education, well, we'll deal with it later. No, it's painful, but sometimes you have to get everybody in the room, and we need to hear what you've planned doesn't work for me, for my department. It doesn't work for my work. And so sometimes that's a good discussion point to say, well, can we make it better? Or is this the way that it is right now due to, time, people, money, whatever? And I feel like that is, we keep pulling our design conversations ahead of work out further and further. I'm trying to get us to the point where we're planning 2 seasons ahead instead of just one.
Mm-hmm.
And that will allow the organization financially to set our sights on some bigger ideas and some bigger, maybe, collaborations, because that takes time. And that now you're dealing with another organizations, like all those things I just said. And so I think that's the thing I bring the most, is that, like, making our calendar for the year is just, it's awful, frankly, but it's necessary for somebody to raise their hand and say, this doesn't work for us, and here's why. And then we all go, okay, well, what do we, how does that ripple through? And so even when we make choices that are hard, we've made them as a group, where we've put our back against a wall somewhere. And so I guess that's what I'm trying to bring, is that nobody is being told what they're going to do, which is one way to lead. I could sit up at the top and say, well, we have to do these shows, and you have to make it work. I do sort of say, I need this, I need this for the well-being of this play. So how can I make it work for the people and make it fit the humans and not, kill everybody.
Understandably.
So, you know,
And I love how integrated, that experience is from an operational capacity, from an educational standpoint, like that sort of integration throughout the season. Sometimes we shoehorn it in, but it definitely right rings true for all of us as artists, is that sometimes, yes, we want to stay present, we want to stay in the moment, we want to be here, but that vision for the future, that planning, that those steps that we take, really sort of lay the foundation so that we can stay present when we arrive in that moment. Um, Last thing I want to ask you, what's one thing you hope audiences take away from the season?
from this season or the coming season?
Both. Let's do both.
Oh, okay. Oh gosh, that's a good question. I guess for this season, I think I really hope that I want people to. We always say that the theater is like a safe place to be curious, a safe place to experience a life that is not maybe doesn't look like yours. And I feel like that's beginning to happen. Is that people have said to me, I don't mind hearing bad things about the shows we do or like negative opinions. In fact, I like it because I want people to trust me and I want people to say to me, I didn't like that play. And then I say, oh, why? Tell me why. And I love that. And sometimes I think that level of trust leads people to say, well, I trust you and I'll sit through this story, even if I'm not sure what it has to do with me. And they find that it has something to do with them because it's about people. So, so that I hope people take that away, that even a life that doesn't look like yours, it doesn't mean you're not connected to it, because you are in one way or another. And the more we see that, the better we are. I keep saying this season that theater is an act of imagination and imagination is an act of empathy. So that's what I hope people begin to develop, is more empathy. And that comes with, anyway, be brave. And next season is really, well, first of all, there's a bird in almost every show, and which is a fun little game for people to play. But it's a lot about, next season's about communication between parents and children and partners and siblings. And it is about sort of those moments where, we have to decide to say the hard thing to each other. We have to decide to open up and take a chance and tell somebody how we actually maybe feel, or the hurt that we carry. And I hope that people will think about that. And again, it's that human experience. I was thinking about, like, when I see a person who's really angry or who's rude, my initial human response is, what the hell? But my next response a lot of times is, I wonder what's happened to that person or is happening to that person. And it gives them grace. And me too. I can then let go of the interaction. I can be like, dang, they must be having a hard day, And so there's that empathy piece. So I guess that's really, I guess I just would like to foster some empathy for sure.
Absolutely. You should put that quote on a t-shirt, market it. There's your next entrepreneurial, retail move. Thank you so much, Jen. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me on. It was a thrill.
You've been listening to Forge Theater Labs. We've been talking to Jen Shepard from Penobscot Theater Company. Thanks so much. We'll see you soon.
This episode was hosted by Joshua N Hsu with post-production by Sam Rapaport.